All right, so man-made disasters, part 2. There is a part 1. I will link to that in the description. But here in the thumbnail, you can see there is a car going off a bridge, which looks like it has failed. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, the first thing I would like to talk about are dams. Now, be careful. Dam, it can be a bad word. It can be a swear word. It can be a curse word in English. But when you are swearing, the dam has an N at the end. All of the dams here will not end with an N. They will look like that. Dams. So if you don't know what a dam is, let's talk about that first. A dam is like a big wall built across a river to stop water from flowing. This makes the water level go up behind the wall, creating a large pool or lake. And we'll talk about why some of these dams are built. So there's a pretty good picture of what a dam looks like in English. You can see that big wall, and behind it is probably a river that has been stopped, and now you have more water behind it. But why do people build dams? Well, in English, we say people build dams to make electricity or to store water that towns and cities can use. So if a town or a city experiences something called a drought is when there is little or no rain, they can have extra rain water. They can have extra water. We call that a reservoir. Another English word that is very French, a reservoir. So dams are built sometimes to create a reservoir. And a reservoir is a large natural or man-made lake used as a source of water supply. So dams, when they work correctly, can be really good. They can be really beneficial. They can be really helpful. But what we are talking about today are disasters. So when things go wrong, dams failing, which leads to flooding and destruction. See, do I have a picture of some destruction? This looks nice, actually. This looks more like a reservoir where you have some extra water if you need it. But when a dam fails, it can cause a flood. So sometimes floods are natural. They can't be helped. Maybe too much rain falls. Can you really blame humans for that? I don't know. If you believe in climate change, maybe. But rain is a natural thing. Humans don't make that happen. But a flood is when a large amount of water goes in places that it shouldn't be. Flood can also be a verb. If you've been with the channel for about a year and a half, you might remember my basement flooded. So we have flooded can be a verb. Flood is a noun. Flood is a noun. Flooded is a verb for the past tense, but flood can also be a verb. Don't you love English? We're going to talk about engineers later on, and they can be like two different jobs. So, last winter, back in December, parts of my town flooded. There was a flood in parts of my town. So you have it as a noun and you have it as a verb. Next thing I would like to talk about in English is something we call infrastructure. Infrastructure. So a dam would be part of infrastructure. Bridges, which we will talk about later, part of infrastructure. So you might hear this word when you hear man-made disasters. What is infrastructure? Well, it's the basic stuff like roads, airports, bridges, buildings that a town or country needs to run smoothly. So this just makes life easier. Infrastructure. So for you to get to work in the morning, if you go over a bridge, that's really good. You don't have to wait on a boat. You don't have to get out of your car and swim across the river. Infrastructure makes towns, countries run more smoothly. If your country has really good infrastructure, it probably has smooth roads. Infrastructure. How about this? Infrastructure also includes buildings like schools and hospitals and large projects for water and electricity. So like those dams we talked about earlier, they help life run more smoothly. But when life doesn't run smoothly, if your town has a dam that is holding back water, well, one thing that could happen is that dam gets breached. That dam could get breached. Breaching means a break or gap in a dam leading to a huge loss of water. And if you look at that picture right now, that dam has been breached. For whatever reason, maybe it's because people made it wrong, but that dam has been breached. There is water that is rushing through the dam. And it looks like, are those cars on top of the dam? I think so. So you can imagine if there is a town or city downriver, it is probably going to be flooded. It is probably going to look like that, unfortunately. What about this? When water breaches a dam, it flows over or breaks the dam and can cause a flood. Yeah, that's not good. And if the flood is bad enough, the town might have to be evacuated. There might be an evacuation. So this is another one of those words that sounds differently if we use it as a verb or a noun. The town has to be evacuated. That is the verb. An evacuation was issued for the town. Well, what is an evacuation? It's when people are forced to leave their homes because of a dangerous situation. Take a look at this. That looks dangerous. Now, of course, I asked AI, create an image where people are evacuating. And this is what they showed. Yeah, that wave is that a wave or are those clouds? Either way, if that is water, that's bad. If those are clouds, it looks like that town has a very big storm coming. So let's talk about a couple floods. Both of these happened in the United States. This first one right here, kind of a famous flood. Lots of people died, unfortunately. The Johnstown flood in 1889. The South Fork Dam failed. So there's that word, failed. It's another way to say it didn't work well. Failed. Just like you can fail an English test I hope that never happens. If you watch my videos each week, it should not happen. But dams can also fail. That means whoever built it didn't do it correctly. Or there was just so much water that it didn't work. So the Johnstown flood in 1889, the South Fork Dam failed, releasing 20 million tons of water that destroyed Johnstown, Pennsylvania, killing more than 2,200 people. Or you could say 2,200 people. That is a lot. Very sad. Just in case, because I teach American English, that probably means if you're on this channel, you like to learn a little bit about the United States. And since this dam failure happened in Pennsylvania, let me show you a couple images of where Pennsylvania is. We have 50 states in the United States. One of them is Pennsylvania. It looks like that. AI made this for me. Again, AI cannot spell, but that looks like a pretty good image of the state of Pennsylvania. Now, this one is from Google, and it's a little better. It will show you where in the country this is located. So in the map, you can see New York City is there. So Pennsylvania isn't all that far from New York City. And below the bottom part of the map, you can see that Washington, D.C. is there. And the biggest city in Pennsylvania is called Philadelphia. Philadelphia. We have another dam failure right here. The St. Francis Dam in 1928. This happened in California. Its failure resulted in a huge flood that claimed the lives of at least 431 people. So when you're talking about disasters and you see the number of people who died as a result, when they say at least, it means there might have been more. They just weren't identified. And a lot of times in a flood, it's not fun to think about, but bodies could be swept out into the ocean. Swept out. I have talked about that English phrasal verb before, but not fun to think about. So we mentioned California. Let's take a look at this. I think I have two images of California for you. We would say that California is on the west coast. Pennsylvania is on the east coast. So California is closer to countries like China, Japan, Korea, and places like Pennsylvania are closer to Europe and Africa. Way out west, Los Angeles is the biggest city in California. Two other cities you may have heard of are San Diego and San Francisco. And this is what AI drew. Again, I think it's pretty accurate. And you can see in the left-hand bottom corner is a California bear. And that looks a lot like California's flag. Each state in the United States also has its own flag. So now we get to talk about train accidents. Oh yeah, more fun stuff. So not so much water with train accidents. I'm sure you all know what a train is in English. It might have been one of the first words you learned. Trains ride on tracks, or they ride on rails, because we will be talking about derailments soon. Train accidents will be the next man-made disaster we discuss. Let's bring up a picture here. Oh yeah, more destruction. train disasters. You can see there is a fire. There is smoke coming from the train. It looks like there are some emergency vehicles nearby trying to help those who were hurt. Yeah. One thing that could happen in a train accident would be a collision. A collision. That is the noun, a collision. Trains could collide. That is the verb. A collision is when two trains or a train and another object come together with force. Now, luckily, trains colliding, it doesn't happen too often. There's pretty good technology to make sure that two trains are not on the same track at a time. But you can imagine when it does happen, it could be really bad. It could be catastrophic. It's a good adjective to know. It's like really, really bad. Catastrophic. But sometimes, and this wouldn't make our list of bad train accidents, a car could get stuck on the tracks and the train could collide with that car. I have a very good friend who is let's talk about that in a minute. Here's another bad train accident that AI made. But let's talk about the person who drives the train. You will hear two words in English. You might hear engineer or you might hear conductor. So an engineer or a conductor is a person who drives the train. And as I was saying earlier, I have a good friend, one of my best friends from high school, and his job now is he's a conductor of a train. He works in Boston. And he tells me that a lot of times trains will collide with deer or moose. That is one of the most common collisions that trains will have. Luckily, not too many cars and not too many people. And definitely, I know he has never collided with another train. What about this one? I want to make sure that my pictures line up here. A freight train collided with the passenger train. So there is collide used in a sentence, but now there are two different kinds of trains. A freight train does not have people on it. A freight train probably has goods. They have products. They have cargo. They have things people could buy. Passenger trains, those are trains that carry people. My friend who works in Boston, he now drives passenger trains. When he first became an engineer, he drove freight trains. So I think if you are a passenger train conductor, you might get paid a little more money because let's face it, if something goes wrong, people could get hurt. If you drive a freight train, well, there's probably a lot of money involved. If you collide with something else and it's your fault, there could be a lot of products lost, a lot of money lost, but not a lot of life. Derailment. That's where we ended, right? Derailment. I think I have a picture for you too. Yep, that's a derailment. Okay. I have all the pictures lined up with all of the sentences. Here we go. A derailment. A derailment is when a train comes off its tracks. So the thing a train rides on is often called the railroad tracks or just the tracks. but sometimes you will hear it called the rails. The rails. And that's where the word derailment comes from. And maybe it happens because of a collision, but it's when the train comes off its tracks. Here we go there. I'm going to leave this picture up. If you ever hear fatalities in English when talking about disasters, it's another way to say somebody died. Fatalities are deaths that happen because of an accident. So in the picture, you can see that the train has derailed. It looks like there may have been some cars involved. Right at the front of the picture, we would call that a stretcher. That thing that looks like it could move a body on wheels. We call that a stretcher. And then all of the other white things on the ground, we might say they are covered with sheets, or maybe they are in body bags. So definitely not fun to think about, but if you ever have to talk about deaths, a fatality is when someone dies. Maybe they had a fatal heart attack. It's a heart attack that caused them to die. If you're ever reading the news, a fatality is when somebody died. A casualty is when somebody died. And it also includes people who have gotten hurt. So fatalities are only people who died. Casualties are people who died and also people who got hurt. Hopefully that helps for the next time you are listening to the news. How about this? Got a sentence for you. He suffered a fatal accident when the train collided with his car on the tracks. So I wanted to include that sentence because it talks about some of the things we've already talked about in the lesson. He suffered a fatal accident when the train collided with his car on the tracks. All right. Talk about a couple disasters that happened around the world. I apologize. I will not say this correctly. This happened in Japan. I'm nervous. Amagasaki. If you are from Japan, tell me, how did I do? Amagasaki rail crash. This happened in Japan, and it happened in 2005. So pretty recently, 2005. A commuter train derailed and collided with an apartment building, resulting in 106 deaths and more than 550 injuries. So you could also say 106 fatalities. I'm not good at math, but if you add those two numbers up, that would be the number of casualties. 656. Please check my math. I'm an English teacher, not a math teacher. So another way to say that is 106 fatalities and 556 casualties. I thought I wanted to say something else about that, but let's make that picture a little bigger. I mean, just awful. Oh yes, commuter train. That's one type of train we haven't talked about. So a commuter train is a type of passenger train. So it has people on it. But if it's a commuter train, it's mostly for people going to work and back. So a commuter train would only be a train in like one city. Probably. Some commuter trains in New York City our biggest city, will also go to places like New Jersey and just outside of the city. But a commuter train is mostly for people going to work and coming home from work. All right, I already know I will not say this correctly. So Tanya, Michael, everyone else in Germany, I apologize. I looked this up and I thought I was pronouncing it correctly. Tanya told me in the members chat, no, not right. And I even left a little note for myself. Can you see it? Eskid. So the Eskid train disaster, this happened in Germany, and it happened on June 3rd, 1998. The high-speed train derailment resulted in 101 fatalities and over 100 injuries. So super sad. People on their way to work, maybe on vacation, and there was a problem on the train. And it ended up killing over 100 people. This was the deadliest high-speed train accident in history. Now, I've talked about high-speed trains, but I haven't explained it. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a train that goes really fast. So a commuter train is not going to be a high-speed train. And I believe in Japan and France, those two countries have the fastest trains in the world. The TGV, right? All right. And this will lead us into our next man-made disaster, which is bridges collapsing. So what made the train disaster in Germany so bad is that it caused a bridge to collapse. And you can see this in the picture. Now there are trains all over the place. This is what AI thought this disaster looked like. The Eskid disaster in Germany. Don't think it had quite that many trains. But you can see that there is a bridge that collapsed. The bridge is no longer there. When we talk about bridges collapsing, and in the picture there, you can see a bridge. They mostly go over water. Bridges are great for trains or people or cars and trucks to cross a body of water. But sometimes bridges can fatigue. Fatigue is a great word to know in English. It's another way to say tired. But bridges can also become fatigued. Take a look. Fatigued means getting weaker because of too much use. As cars and trucks use the bridge, it will fatigue over time. And if you are really, really sick and you don't have any energy, maybe you haven't had enough water or enough liquid, you could feel fatigued. So it's almost like really, really, really tired. Also, if you are lifting weights, if you are working out, your muscles can become fatigued because you use them so much. How about this? Don't think I have a picture of fatigued people, but people can become fatigued too. It's like really, really tired. Fatigued. All right. This is a little confusing. Oh, actually, I do have a picture of fatigued. Here are a bunch of people who look fatigued. You can see these people. Maybe you feel fatigued at the end of a long work day. Yeah, some of these people are yawning. Thank you, AI, for drawing all of these people who look fatigued. But I also wanted to talk about another type of people, and these are engineers. And what can make this so difficult is that earlier in the lesson, we talked about engineers are people who drive trains, also conductors. But engineers can also design bridges. Come on, English. Why do you have to be so difficult? One word for two very different types of jobs. Engineers are people who design bridges. Sometimes they get things wrong. But engineers are also people who drive trains. Doesn't make any sense. If somebody is designing a building, they might be called an engineer, but they're probably called an architect in English. They're probably an architect. Engineers build bridges for the most part. Also, dams, like we talked about earlier, I would say engineers might also design and build dams. Hopefully that helps. So, an inspection. Think about bridges. Think about dams. Every so often, they should get an inspection to make sure they are not becoming fatigued. What is an inspection? It's when people look closely at something to make sure it's okay. So hopefully we won't have any bridges collapsing, because during an inspection, the inspectors, those are the people who inspect things, the inspectors will find places where the bridge is failing before it is a complete disaster. In that picture, I also have a car. So at least where I live, one time a year, I have to take my car in to get it inspected, just to make sure there aren't any problems. And it's not because I want to do it, it's because it's the law. And on my front windshield, I will get an inspection sticker to say that my car has been inspected and that it is safe. Tacoma. This is in the state of Washington. We'll talk about that in a minute. You can look this up on YouTube. It's pretty famous, even though you can see down below, it happened in 1940, but there were cameras capturing what happened. And this is all the fault of the engineers. So it's the people who designed the bridge. They are the people who caused this to happen. Good news, no people die in this bridge collapse, but a dog does. You can look it up. It's crazy. It's because of the wind. A little wind starts the bridge to rock back and forth, and it just gets so big that it will eventually collapse. All right, this bridge, it's called the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. It happened in 1940. This bridge in Washington, USA, moved a lot in the wind and finally fell apart. Engineers designed the bridge wrong. Okay, I also want to talk about suspension bridge. In English, we would call this type of bridge a suspension bridge because you can see the cables that are going from the tower down below. It's called a suspension bridge. And in 1940, this was a new kind of bridge. Not all of them worked out well. One of the most famous suspension bridges in the United States is in California, in the city of San Francisco, and it's called the Golden Gate Bridge. Very old bridge, a suspension bridge. That bridge worked. It's been around for a while. Let's talk about Washington, though. This can be confusing even to some like Americans. Washington State is not the same as Washington, D.C. Washington State is out on the West Coast, close to California. There's one state in between Washington and California, and we call it Oregon. Some people call it Oregon. But Washington looks like that. And I can make it a little bigger with this Google map. So you can see the biggest city in Washington is called Seattle. Vancouver is up there, part of Canada. And down below here is Portland. But that is Portland, Oregon. Where I live in Maine, our biggest city is also Portland. But Portland, Oregon, that's the bigger of the two Portlands. Okay, going back to that Tacoma Bridge disaster, luckily, nobody died. But there was a dog stuck in the car when the bridge collapsed. Yeah, so the bridge started swaying back and forth. There were cars on the bridge. And one car, if you look up the video, there's a car on the bridge. Everybody got out, but the poor dog was left inside. So you can take a look at that bridge if you would like. Another bridge, another suspension bridge. This is called the Silver Bridge in 1967. This is a bridge between West Virginia and Ohio, also in the United States. This bridge broke and fell because of a tiny problem in one part. Poor engineering. So again, man-made disaster. This is the fault of people. The Silver Bridge was a suspension bridge that connected West Virginia and Ohio over the Ohio River. I think I have a picture. Yeah. So we're back on the East Coast now. And you can see in the middle is the state of West Virginia. Not too far from Philadelphia. And then we have Ohio. Right in the middle of the country, really. Columbus is the biggest city in Ohio, but you might also hear Cincinnati and Cleveland. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland. There is a picture of what AI thinks the Ohio River might look like. Kind of peaceful. And unfortunately, this man-made disaster happened at the worst time. It happened during rush hour. So it happened at the worst possible time during rush hour. 46 people ended up dying because of the bridge collapse. 46 people. What was this? 1967. So you would think by then, engineers would design bridges without flaws, but unfortunately, that is not the case. But that is the end of our English lesson, part 2 of man-made disasters.